Welcome to the HR Stories podcast, listener question edition, where there is a lesson in every story. Each week, the team at HR Stories podcast shares questions from our podcast audience and provides tangible, practical advice that everyone can use to get HR right. Our hosts today are management and HR consultants Chuck Simikian and John Tallheimer. What is on your mind today? Welcome, everyone. My name is John Tallheimer, and I am here with my co-host Chuck Simikian to answer your questions. Every week, we get questions in from our podcast listeners, from our Facebook group. We get them in through email. We are here to answer your questions. So, Chuck, let's start with an easy question for you. How are you doing today?
I am doing fantastic. It is a beautiful day here in Orlando, Florida.
All right, fantastic. All right, it looks like we got three good questions that Samantha got for us. Are you ready to answer them? I'm going to kind of dive right in here if you're ready.
I'm ready. And for those of our new listeners, Samantha is our producer here at the HR Stories podcast.
Where there is a lesson in every story.
There you go.
Here's the first question. Samantha is giggling in the background. I hear her already. We have an employee on FMLA. This is from one of our, I think, Facebook group. Is that right, Chuck?
Yes, it is from our Facebook team, the HR Team of One community on Facebook.
Fantastic. We have an employee on FMLA for a surgery. She went to her doctor today. And so this was probably in the middle of July and is released to come back early August with no restrictions. So she went to the doctor and a month later, she's allowed to come back with no restrictions. This listener has a few questions. Number one, do we need to request a more current doctor's note closer to her return date? Or since they already released her to come back on a specific date in August with no restrictions, will that suffice? What do you think, Chuck?
Yeah, with that one, I would say that if it came through as a return to work and a release date, you're good to go. You don't need to wait another couple weeks and say, I need another one. So I think you're good on that, if that's truly what that note and letter was.
Yeah, and I think there's your point, right? And so I think the one thing that I would say is make sure you have the documentation from the medical provider or healthcare provider, right? Don't allow for the employee to come and say, well, my doctor said I was fine to come back the week in August, right? Because then what's going to happen is, oh gosh, my doctor just told me blah, blah, blah. But you're in that bind. Well, you don't have any documentation. And then you're going to have to go through that whole. We've had that happen, I hate to say it, where we didn't get the actual healthcare provider's note. We just took the employee's word for it. So that's the only kind of thing I would there. All right. Question number two. The employee asked if the company would allow her to work from home when she returns, but the position is not conducive to a from home environment. Since her doctor released her with no restrictions, do we need to make this accommodation? What do you think, Chuck?
I don't know. What do you think, John?
Oh, come on. Now, I think it's a good question, right? Because you have to really decide if you as the employer do get to choose where the employee is going to work, right? Mm-hmm. We have that right to choose. And so we could say you need to be in the office. And so the thing that I would ask if I was working as the HR consultant is this employee a unique role within the company? Are there other people working from home? Because I would start being concerned if you're allowing other people to work from home and not her. Why that is that an FMLA retaliation for her taking FMLA? But if it's a job that needs to be done from the workplace, or you deem that it needs to be done from the workplace, I think as long as the doctor released her with no restrictions, I don't think you need to make any accommodation in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you on that one.
Okay, good. All right. Well, that was an easy one. All right.
Yeah.
Question number two. This goes into age discrimination in the workplace. So the questioner, the person that asked the question or listener, asked this: is this considered age discrimination? The CEO is constantly talking about the next generation and calling the current leadership team, I guess, not as young and moving the company to the next level. Is this considered age discrimination? What do you think?
Yeah, we would need more info with that, but I think overall, based on just this question, it depends. Okay, the famous HR answer. It depends. But overall, if the CEO is just saying things like, "Oh, the current leadership's not as young," or there's no, then it may not be. And we use that severe and pervasive standard in some ways. But if there's some tangible things, and John, I caution these leaders out there to watch what they say, because it can always come back. There was a court case where a company, the senior leaders were sending emails back and forth, and I want to think it was an older, when I say older company, no pun intended, but it was a long-term company like a Xerox or an AT&T or something like that, and they tended to have a lot of long-term workers, and so the senior leadership were sending emails back saying, we need to get these folks to retire. I think they called them the cavemen are still here. We need younger blood. We need newer blood. And so they were sending these things. So fast forward now, there was a case of age discrimination filed in that company. Whether that case was true or not, there was discovery that went on. And during that discovery, they discovered all these emails that may or may not have anything to do with that one particular claim, but it did give the EEOC and the courts a chance to say, okay, there's probably a tone set in this company, which now leads us to probably think that age discrimination claim is probably more valid, because the tone of what leaders are saying and putting in emails is there towards age discrimination. What do you think?
And I think that lesson there, right? Don't put things in emails. Again, if you're an HR professional and you're going to have a serious conversation with a leadership person, probably have that conversation and don't put it in emails, right? Because that is discoverable. I think that's one of the things. All of our emails, all of the notes that we take are all discoverable. And so being very careful with that is good. Yeah, I don't see anything about that as age discrimination just because he's calling it out. Now, there may be a bias. There may be tangible actions that the CEO is taking, saying, looking at people when they're interviewing going, well, we're not going to hire them because they're because they're too old or they have too much experience, right? And so that's where I get concerned. That's how I would, like, as a consultant, I would come in and start asking those type of questions. Was there tangible things taken over there? So
yeah.
All right. Our last question of the day. Looking for best practices. And I know, Chuck, you've dealt with this a lot, so I think this is going to be a good one for you. Looking for best practices when someone goes on a leave of absence, right? So they're there. Do you suspend their system access, emails, files, security, why they're on leave? We're trying to set up new processes at my company.
Yeah. So I would say yes, that would be a good practice for a couple of reasons. Number one, if it's an hourly employee that goes on leave, well, they shouldn't have access to a lot of these systems and files anyways, but just in case they do, you're going to have to pay them. If they're a salaried employee, and I know a lot of salaried exempt employees may take leave of absence, maybe it's a maternity, paternity leave, some sort of FMLA leave, yet they feel this obligation to check emails, to check in, and whether it's real or not pressure, they do that. And that can pierce the bubble of FMLA and your leave of absence and not paying them during this time. So I have done that. And also, I've seen it where people will want to take off a couple of extra days if you're a salaried employee and you don't want to get paid. I had this situation. We hired a marketing manager. She said, "Hey, Chuck, I'm going to be getting married, going to be going on a honeymoon. I only need 3 days off. If I could have Friday off because we're getting married Saturday, and then Monday, Tuesday off because we're going to go on a mini honeymoon. I don't have any vacation. Can I do that?" So the answer was, sure, we could do that. But I made sure she was very clear. You cannot check your emails. You cannot check in. You cannot check your phone. I cut off her access. I actually had her sign a memo saying, "I will not." And when she came back, I had her re-sign the memo saying, "I did not." So it covered us. It covered us. But I do think that is a good practice to do.
Yeah, and the other part of that is, right, that security part as well, right? Access to the building, all of that kind of stuff. If somebody's going to be out on a long-term leave of absence, I would deny them access to the building because they're not workers, right? And so if they want to come in, they can come in the public entrance. If they need to come in and talk to HR or something, they can do that way. So probably don't need to do that anymore. Back in the day, that was more likely, but I would cut off their security access too. So I think those were really good questions. You guys keep your questions coming. We want to hear from you. We want to make sure you're doing that. So just reach out to us at Chuck. What's the email address?
Sure. Email at team@hrstories.com. That's email at team@hrstories.com.
I love that you were doing that with your hand motion. Not that they'll be able to see that on the podcast, but you're doing that. And Samantha will always, as she always does, puts it in the show notes, so it'll be in there as well. If you are on our Facebook group, put your question in there and say, "I would love you guys to answer this on the podcast," and we will do that. And if you're not on our Facebook group, do make sure that you join it as well.
Sure. The team, the HR Team of One community on Facebook. It's free, and you can, a lot of times, it's HR and management professionals asking and answering questions. It's a great support group, and we encourage you to jump on and join.
Yeah, I always find something new or find a different way to attack something, so it's always good to kind of throw it out to the wisdom of the group and kind of get that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to HR Stories Podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories Podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories Podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.